Good day, YouTubers. This shot was definitely a bit of a challenge, but also a lot of fun. Okay, I seem to be somewhat technically challenged today because my audio is acting a little strange, but there we go. Things appear to be working kind of sort of more properly. Anyway, so I realized what I needed to do was take a shot that was already completely done and let's fix it up was kind of the idea here. So because her face was all wrong. This is all stuff from back when it was all being done in OpenToonz, and I would have liked to have been able to fix it in OpenToonz, but as I sort of alluded to in yesterday's video, just the patching process of painting over stuff and whatnot is so much easier and more fluid in Krita that it just really was the right thing to do. So the first thing I did actually was what you see here is I took a head pose that's kind of in my character library for Akari, and just dragged and dropped it in there and resized it and made it fit. And then most of the entire process really was what you see here, where I'm just painting in over top of what was already there, seeing what I can keep, seeing what I want to throw away, and then doing some tweens to tighten up the motion, especially with a lot of motion blur, because this is a shot where you have really snappy rapid motion. And one thing that also came up a lot was what in Krita they call the liquefy tool, which just lets you kind of mush the pixels around. What did make it difficult, I must say, is that the main shot, the background and the character were baked together. So I had to do a fair amount of painting into the background to just basically copy over the pixels that were that needed to be erased. I couldn't just erase them. I had to actually paint over them using the color of the background and then kind of blurring it to make it all work. So, but in the process of doing that, as you see here, I kind of added her pigtails and I'm doing some shadowing, and right there you see I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and just add some tweens, so there's some secondary motion on the stuff that would tend to bounce around in this sort of a snappy motion, like her pigtails, like her ponytail, and as you will see, yes indeed, her bosom. There is one point where I actually did paint in a bit of a bounce. I have to confess, it seemed like the right thing to do. So this is not really R-rated, but there is bosom motion. So you see there how that's what I had to do. I'm like squishing things around and then having to repaint back into it. Her bangs were completely wrong in this shot. They were so bad. I'm going to take a sip of my tasty beverage, by the way. So yeah, it was a good experience. Okay, so I'll try to relate. I mean, I think it's mostly self-explanatory. The shadows, I didn't really want to do a shadow layer, but there was a lot of this kind of thing where it's like, yeah, the characterization is close, but it's just not quite right, and so I was having to like widen her eyes a little bit. And the thing was, once you do that, like right there, of course it distorts other things, so then you have to paint back into it. So there's a lot of distorting and then painting in and painting out. But the final result was worth it. There was one little issue there, and I don't know if it's come up. You see, that was how I did the tween. Just smear it around with a paintbrush and then add some motion blur, and it was amazing how well it worked. So I may be getting too enamored of that technique because it seems to be coming up over and over. But if it feels right, you go with it. So, and a lot of times what I would do is I would take a frame like this one, just copy it like two frames earlier, then distort it around, add motion blur, and just see if it worked. And if it didn't work, just delete the new keyframe, and most of it did work. But what I was about to say is I think there was an issue here where I realized that her head was actually a little bit too small, and I had to size it up a bit. Now, there was a video, I don't know, probably a month ago, where I was talking about deliberately introducing some blur. So you can see that's a little bit fuzzy. But the fact is that when you do the liquify tool, it introduces blur for you anyway, so it sort of does a bit of a job of softening things up a little bit. You don't really want them to be too sharp, and I think the reason for that is the aesthetic of anime generally has been over the years the idea that this stuff is all being done on paper, and then they're having to scan it into the computer. So you get this certain softness that some commentators miss. You know, when they talk about anime that have been made more recently, you know, it's been noted that it tends to be crisper and sharper. And that's not a bad thing, but for some people it kind of is a bad thing. It's like they sort of miss the days when you get a little bit more organic and a little softer feeling. I did have a lot of dyslexia moments, I have to say, where I would be fixing things up like you're seeing here, and then realize that I had painted into the wrong layer and had to go back and kind of redo it. So that did happen a few times. You do have to be very vigilant, because in Krita, if you, in the timeline, which is the lower part of the screen, if you click in the timeline onto another layer, it does not actually switch to that layer. You can drag the keyframes around and whatnot, but as far as painting, whatever layer is selected in the layer stack on the right, that's where the painting happens. So if you're moving fast and you're not paying attention, it's easy to make some mistakes in that regard. So I definitely did. So there's the little bit of a bosom fix. And that right there, you see I erased that. I realized oh man, I just painted that into the wrong layer. It's always a bit disappointing. Sorry about that. You guys can maybe hear me sipping my tasty beverage, which tonight happens to be the venerable fine Pilsner beer. So the latest stuff I've been hearing about Kappa is basically what I said about 2 days after the whole controversy stirred up, which was that I think this whole thing's going to sort of fizzle out with a thud, and it turns out I was correct. The legalities of it, as I read the material, read the law, and kind of read into some of the comments of and what seemed to be the obvious motivations and signal flow that the FTC would have to follow in order to, you know, shut down YouTube channels and whatnot. All the logic of it said to me that all the panic, which of course I participated in at first, wasn't well founded, and in point of fact, it's going to turn out that this really isn't much of a threat at all for most YouTubers, and that appears to be the general consensus now. Everyone seems to agree, and basically we're not hearing that much about it other than people posting videos to share the news that there's really nothing to worry about. And you know, for those of you who don't already know that there's nothing to worry about, well, there's nothing to worry about. Well, there it is, folks. There's the shot. Look at that. Came out nice. There will be more later.